Turns out they owed me over $1 million, and they almost had me arrested on my own driveway before I figured it out. Yeah, that's how my week started. The morning the sheriff rolled up and told me I was trespassing on community property, I was standing on gravel my father laid down with his own hands. 21 years I'd lived there. 21. And suddenly I'm the criminal because a woman with a clipboard and a perfume cloud the size of Texas decided she owned the horizon. You ever have a moment where something is so ridiculous it doesn't even make you mad at first? It just makes you blink? That was me, wrench still in my hand, staring at Sheriff Wade Collins like he'd just told me the sky had been rezoned. Behind him stood Heather Mollery, president of the Mollery Ridge HOA, self-appointed guardian of beige paint and matching shutters. She had that look, the tight smile, the kind that says she'd been rehearsing this. "Cole," Wade said, shifting his weight, not quite meeting my eyes. "HOA filed a complaint. Says you're trespassing on community access property." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Wade, this is my driveway." Heather stepped forward before he could answer, papers clutched like scripture. "Your solar panels are non-compliant. Your cattle gate violates material standards, and your machinery creates disturbances. We've issued multiple warnings. Your HOA," I said slowly, "does not apply to my ranch." Her jaw flexed. Everyone inside Mollery Ridge boundaries follows HOA rules. No exceptions. That's when something inside me went still. Not angry. Not yet. Just aware. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't bluffing. She believed it. And belief like that comes from paperwork. So when the envelopes started arriving, thick ones, stamped with that ridiculous gold crest, I knew this wasn't about solar panels. They cited unauthorized structures, unregistered vehicles, driveway encroachment. My nephew's truck from Sunday dinner was apparently destabilizing community aesthetics. By sundown, neighbors who'd waved for years suddenly found their mailboxes fascinating when I drove by. Miguel Ortega leaned against his fence that evening, hat low, voice quiet. "She's done this before," he said. "Turners, Bowdens, buries you in violations until you sell." "Over what?" I asked. "Control. But here's the thing. Bullies don't escalate unless they think they're safe." That part stuck with me. So the next morning, I walked into the county records office with every notice in a binder and a knot in my gut. Linda Barrett was behind the counter, gray hair, sharp eyes. She'd seen every land dispute since Nixon. "Morning, Cole. You look like someone poked a hornet's nest. More like they claim they own the nest." She typed in my parcel number, and I watched her expression change. Not fear, curiosity. "Well," she muttered, "that's interesting." Turns out during subdivision planning back in 2001, the developer filed a proposed planning map, colored parcels, access corridors, nice neat lines that made everything look HOA owned. But the deed, the actual legal deed, never changed. Linda rotated the monitor toward me and tapped the screen. Highlighted in yellow were pieces of land scattered right through Mollery Ridge. The playground pad, the pavilion, the drainage basin, the trailhead, even the mailbox cluster. "All still in your family's name," she said. I swear the room tilted. For 22 years, the HOA had been using my land like it was theirs, collecting dues, building amenities, enforcing rules. And the only easement they'd ever had expired in 2017. They weren't just wrong. They were exposed. I drove home with copies of every record stacked beside me. Heart pounding for a whole new reason. Heather hadn't been confident because she was powerful. She'd been confident because she'd never checked. That afternoon, I called Tommy Reed, a surveyor who used to work with my dad. By noon, we were walking through Mollery Ridge planting fluorescent orange stakes like we were flagging buried treasure. Except it wasn't treasure. It was liability. When we flagged the trailhead, a couple residents stared. When we flagged the pavilion, whispers started. By the time we hammered a stake beside the mailbox cluster, people were coming out of their houses. Heather appeared on her porch like a storm front in heels. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Tommy didn't even look up. "Marking legally recorded property lines. You can't mark HOA land." He finally met her eyes. "Ma'am, this land isn't yours." The silence that followed felt electric. That was the first crack. The second crack came at 10:29 p.m. 3 nights later. See, when you corner someone like Heather, they don't retreat gracefully. They scheme. I installed cameras along my fence line. Not dramatic ones, small, quiet, patient. And they caught her, dumping yard waste onto my pasture. Her husband using my land to turn a landscaping trailer. And then the big one, Heather crouching beside my survey stakes with a can of green spray paint, repainting the bright orange markers to blend into the grass. Tampering with legal survey markers isn't an HOA violation. It's a crime. The next morning, I showed her the footage by the mailbox. Her face drained of color so fast, I thought she might faint. "You can't record me," she whispered. "You stepped onto my land," I said. At night, with spray paint. Neighbors were watching now. You could feel it, the shift. Not loud, just awareness. That's when I called Grace Holloway. Grace didn't smile much, but when she reviewed my deed beside that unofficial planning map, she did something close. "Cole," she said, tapping the expired easement date, "they've been operating illegally for 6 years. Possibly liable for back rent, penalties, and removal costs." "How much?" I asked. She slid a page toward me. "Between unpaid use, damages, and removal estimates if I refuse to renew access, north of $1 million. I leaned back and let that settle. The woman who tried to find me for my cattle gate was sitting on $1 million problem she didn't even know existed. Now here's the twist nobody saw coming, including me. Miguel showed up with a folder full of violation letters she'd sent him over rose bushes and shed paint. Janice Fuller brought recordings of HOA meetings. Heather mocking residents, threatening fines, belittling families. The woman had built an empire on intimidation. And suddenly everyone realized she never had the authority to begin with. So we didn't take it straight to court. We held a barbecue. On my land. Invited the whole subdivision. Invited county officials. Sheriff Collins came to observe. Heather arrived in full armor, blazer, clipboard, indignation cranked to 11. "This gathering is unauthorized," she announced. Sheriff Collins cut in. "Ma'am, you requested civil standby. That means you stand by." I stepped onto a makeshift platform, hay bales and plywood, and held up the deeds. "The playground," I said, "is on my property. The pavilion, the mailbox cluster, all of it." Gasps. Whispers. Grace explained the expired easement, the liability, the potential removal costs. Heather tried to shout over it, but then I played the footage, her at night, spray paint in hand. You could feel the temperature change. Janice stepped forward. "You find my daughter over sidewalk chalk." Miguel said, "You lied to us." And then Commissioner Webb, who'd been standing quietly in the crowd, cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the documents," he said. "They're valid. The HOA is operating outside its legal authority." That was the avalanche. The next morning at the emergency HOA meeting, the board members looked like they'd aged 10 years overnight. When county officials announced a formal investigation into financial misuse and fraudulent enforcement, Heather finally looked small. Sheriff Collins walked in, hat under his arm. "Your restraining order request," he told her flatly, "has been denied." Board members started resigning one by one, letters sliding across the table like surrender flags. Heather sat there alone, whispering, "You'll regret this." But nobody moved to comfort her. That silence? That was karma. Within a week, she resigned. The remaining board came to negotiate. We settled on a 10-year lease, fair market value, full maintenance responsibility on their side, strict boundary enforcement clauses. They signed. I signed. And for the first time in decades, the relationship between my ranch and that subdivision was honest. I could have crushed them financially, forced removal of every structure, bankrupted the HOA. I didn't. Instead, I took the lease payments and started a local trade scholarship, $5,000 a year for kids going into electrical, plumbing, AG work. The kind of skills that actually build communities instead of regulating mailbox colors. Miguel's nephew was the first applicant. And here's the part nobody tells you about winning like this. It doesn't feel loud. It feels quiet, like standing at your fence at sunset, listening to your cattle gate creak in the wind, knowing the ground beneath your boots is still yours. Not because you yelled the loudest, but because you had proof. Heather tried to own something she never took the time to understand. That's the lesson that hit me hardest. Power built on assumption will always collapse under documentation. And intimidation only works until someone reads the fine print. So now I'll ask you something. Where's the line between enforcing order and abusing power? When does community standards become control? If you've ever stood your ground when someone tried to push you off your own dirt, literal or otherwise, drop a yes and tell me what happened. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from knowing the law and having the patience to let the truth do the heavy lifting.